Okay, you have to forgive me if there's a little feedback noise, but I'm driving right now, but just trying to crank these videos out. So, how you name or define items is very important. And we know that in this beast nation, so-called United States, apartheid America, that was once Turtle Island, we know that we've been defined, we have been branded, we have been misrepresented, we have been labeled in a certain way. They look at us a certain way, but that shouldn't change how you look at yourself. But historically, I've always been thinking about how do we look at them? You know, I've been looking at secular history, and I've been looking at biblical history. And a lot of the research and the reading I've been doing over the years, it's all seeming to come together now. Now, I'm going to say something. It may be a little bit of an overgeneralization, which I know that can be negative, but I think it still lands appropriately where it needs to, even if the term may be a little broad. Now, when you go back to the Greeks and the Romans, and one thing, unfortunately, the Etruscans who preceded the Romans, there's not that's known or at least revealed about them. You know, so we're going to get a little bit into a history lesson here, but we're going to jump out and how does it apply for today and how I apply it. Now, so with the Greeks and the Romans, the Greeks started what was in the islands or coastal communities in the Aegean Sea area. They got everything they got from the Egyptians, most likely. And then from the initial island and coastal civilizations, they went deeper into the mainland of the sort of Greek peninsula in the Mediterranean and the Greek land that we know as today. And obviously we know with the Romans, who came after the Etruscans, they took over the Italian peninsula. Now, the other quote-unquote European groups in the region, because we don't really see any civilization or advancement in Europe to that level and to other civilizations that you had around at that time and prior. We don't see anything like that quite so in Europe. So what was going on in Europe, and how did the Greeks look at it? How did the Romans look at it? Because they were you also kind of had the Hittites in the Anatolian Peninsula, what we call Turkey today. But those were the main powers for the most part in that area. You know, you had the Iberians, Carthage, the Phoenicians, the Carthaginians, and primarily the southern half of the Iberian Peninsula. Up there go to Popo. So, but especially with the Greeks and the Romans, since they're the most infamous, how did they look at these other so-called European tribes? Well, when you think of it, the Vandals, the Goths, the Visigoths, the Gauls, the Franks, you know, even a connection to the Celts, the Druids, all these various different groups. Now, we know that the Greeks and the Romans called them barbarians, but who were they really? Well, when you think about it, and when you look at language, when you look at history, essentially, they are all various different Germanic tribes that were mainly in the greater mass of Central Europe or Central Western Europe. But essentially, when I look at it, they're basically all Germans. I mean, if the Franks, the Gauls, what now is France, you know, they were more so influenced by Latin or the Romans than others, but they're basically Germans. And even in Germany, you know, when you have a town like Frankfurt, you know, Frank is mentioned so many times in the German country today. The hot dog, the sausage, the Frankfurter, you know, you have that connection. So if you look and see what these different European nation states that you have today, and if you really dig that, research, you can find the common German bond, particularly of Central Western Europe. Now, there's a term that you may have heard called Creole, and it's taken on different connotations in history. Now, I've stated this in another video. You need to understand the importance of some terms mean certain things today, and they meant certain things in yesteryears. Certain terms mean something here in the so-called United States. Other terms mean or the same term may mean something else in other parts of the world. Okay, now that term Creole in, say, Mexico means something different than here. The term Creole, essentially what you could translate it from in Brazil, means something differently than what it means here. Okay, and essentially even in Louisiana, the Louisiana territory, kind of like that lower part of New France, even initially going back to the 1600s, the term Creole amongst the French means something different than what it would mean in what now is supposed to be considered the so-called United States apartheid America. Now, Creole means, you have to forgive me, my financial app is, a lot of movement in the markets. Creole mainly means initially a quote-unquote European person that was not born in the Europa continent, but born somewhere else. Now, they were meaning the Europeans that were born over here, the so-called New World, instead of the Europeans that were being born and came over in what was considered the European heartland or the European motherland, whatever you want to call it, Europa. So they referred to the ones who came later on, who were born in the newer territory, to them. It was new to them. They referred to them as Creoles. The French, the Spanish, the Portuguese, they refer to these quote-unquote American in the Americas born Europeans as Creoles. Okay, now if you trace the etymology of that word, Creole has taken on different connotations over the years, and now it's even applied to us in a number of ways, the Afro-Asiatic people of the diaspora. But Creole is a word that comes from them, and a Creole is a word that was applied to them before it ever stuck to us. So when you look at the history, and since essentially the start of what eventually would seed the continent that we would call quote-unquote Europeans to this day, they're basically various different Germanic tribes. And with the influence of the Romans, of Latin, different tribes, after the, I'm going to say decline, not the fall, because Rome never really truly fell, but that's a story for another day. With the decline of Rome in the West, these different Germanic tribes, in the fallout of the decline and the receding of the influence of the Roman Empire, their civilizations took on a different makeup after that big change. But essentially, they're all Germans, basically, essentially. Even the Scandinavians or the Nordic people have a connection with the Germans, the German, Nordic, Scandinavian connection. And when you get more into like the Russians, the Finns, more of the Eastern Europeans, even to the original Caucasians, the real Caucasians, because that term should not apply to every person who's a pale face. That really should only apply to certain people. Those are a different group of people, and as well as the Southern Europeans or the Mediterranean Europeans, because they're more of a mixture. But we're mainly talking about more the Central Western Europeans. So what I've decided to refer to them is I'm going to start calling them the Criole Germans, or the Criole Germans Europeans. Now, you can have different spellings of Creole. It could be spelled C-R-E, or it could be spelled C-R-I. What I'm going to do, I'm going to spell it C-R-I, and that way you'll know the difference between Creole, how it's been applied to us, the people of brown skin, the copper colored people, C-R-E, and then the pale skinned people, C-R-I, the Criole Germanic Europeans that are now over here. And particularly when you're talking about apartheid America, 99.9% of all of these so-called white people that are living today, all of them, or most of them, were born on the land. There's going to be a smaller number who were immigrants who came over there recently and are now over here. That happened more so in the past, where you had the influx of all of these Europeans because they were trying to whiten the country up. But most of the ones that are here now, whether they're first generation, second generation, third generation, they were born in the land. So they should be considered to be Creoles. So defining things, terminology, the language, naming things is very important. Even if English is not our indigenous native language, we still need to use it to the best of the ability. Excuse me. So the term will be, moving forward, the term will be Criole Germanic Europeans. Or if you see me write it and you see me do the C-R-I instead of C-R-E, you know I'm talking about them, and I'm not talking about something else.